Every panel has a pop-up menu, so you have, in this case, the option of resetting if you just want to start again. There is an auto button here, and I must be honest and say my opinion of auto has changed quite dramatically in the last couple of years. Because before, I used to just be very blunt and say, don't use anything with the word auto in it. Because who the heck is auto and what does he know? Like, how is he going to adjust my photograph for me? But they've made some significant changes to the way that the auto function works in the last couple of years. So I would now say it's worth a try and click on it and see if you like it or not. I wouldn't rely on it extensively because, for example, in this case I clicked auto and it took the highlight triangle and moved it in a little further than I would, because to me I'm already seeing some pretty nice highlights. So, but at worst, you can always say, well, that's what it wanted, but I'm still pushing this back, because again, that's the advantage of an adjustment layer, is nothing is ever, oh well, I don't have any choice now of, I have to live with what it is. Okay?
Dave, one
yes.
more quick question for somebody online. Do you do the full level and then each channel second, or do you just start with the channels?
That's, I would say that, again, that's a personal preference. I think most people, if they're going to use channels, they just start there. But even that, you might look at it and say, well, now that I've done that, let me see if it makes any difference or not. Cool. A lot of these, the reason I'm showing various methods is everyone has different methods they kind of like to say, this one works better for me, I'm more happy with the results. We have to always remind ourselves, too, that a lot of this thing is all about perception, because technically values can be a certain number, but at a certain point it's like, do I like this or not? And of course, part of the challenge here is we're making judgments of whether we like it or not based on a monitor. And if I know I'm going to put this on another monitor like my portfolio online, I'm okay. If I'm going to print this, that's a whole different thing. Because what you see on the screen is not what you're going to get on your printer most times, unless you have a very high-end monitor that's been very carefully calibrated and everything else. Actually, let me just mention that for one other moment, because I've mentioned this to a few people in the past, and people have seemed to find it valuable. I work on a laptop almost exclusively. So I tried putting one of those fancy little calibration things on here. Didn't work so much because the technology of these LCD monitors on a laptop aren't the same as a technical monitor. But the one thing that did happen, though, is when I was going through this calibration process, one of the things it said is, now change the physical brightness of your monitor so these two gray boxes look the same. And I was going lower, 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 lower. I could not believe how much I had to turn down the brightness to make them match. And I suddenly had one of those light bulb moments where I realized all those times I'd be complaining, saying my printer was too dark. The real problem was my monitor was too bright. So that's like the simplest way without going into heavy-duty calibration. And I'll tell you right up front, you'll hate it for the first 3 weeks. Because every time you look at your monitor, you're like, oh, it's so dark. And what I do is, if I'm doing something like browsing around the internet, I'll put my brightness back up again, because I hate looking at web pages that are so dark. But once I started doing that, when I made prints, they suddenly looked so much closer. Because we're looking at this thing that's backlit, that's projecting light in our face, and we're comparing that with ink on paper. It's never going to be the same. And anyone who says, well, I want them to match, you have to make your life better by setting yourself up so it will be a closer match. One of the ways to do that is to change the monitor brightness and then use some of these methods that are more based on what the histogram says, not just what you think. Okay? And you can also do a quick test and say, I'm going to do a test print and see if I'm closer and things of that nature.
Another quick question from Alfred Myers, and then a couple other people also want to know the answer. Could adjusting the levels on the different color channels be used for correcting white balance, and/or does that affect white balance in general?
It does affect white balance, and one of the things that I find still a little odd to consider in today's version of Photoshop, which whatever number it is now, because now that it's CC 2014, we don't really know what that is. It's like, I don't know, 15 or something, who knows, is that there's not just a tool in Photoshop called White Balance Tool. It's in Camera Raw, it's in Lightroom. So my answer is very simply, that's one of the reasons I use the Camera Raw filter from within Photoshop, because I can just open it and, as you'll see, click on White Balance. So to answer the question, while you can, let me say it this way, it will affect the white balance. It's hard to make an educated adjustment. It's just, it will affect it as you're doing it on that per channel basis.